Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side. Hello and welcome back to Fuck That. It is me, your favorite cult leader, aka host of the best true crime podcast you've ever listened to. I have a lot of balls today. I'm sorry. Don't know where they came from. But if you haven't guessed, today we're going to be talking about cults because I have been going down a rabbit hole. So today I am diving headfirst into the absolute rabbit hole of cults. And it's not just any cult, but it's Heaven's Gate. If you haven't heard about them, you probably live under a rock like Patrick Star from SpongeBob. But Heaven's Gate was the group that took leaving Earth way too literally. The cult that was waiting on a spaceship behind a comet to take them to the next level. Because apparently Earth was just the beta version of existence to them, and they were ready for the full release. I know what you're thinking. This is the third episode now where I am diving into a cult, and you must be wondering quietly to yourself, how does anybody even start believing in this? How do they recruit? Don't fret, little bear. I have your answer. Obviously, like with every other cult, it all begins with a charismatic leader because, let's be serious, nobody's joining a cult with a really boring and shitty frontman. Enter Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. This is a story that is as bizarre as it is tragic. This is a story of manipulation, desperation, and unfortunately, matching tracksuits. So we're going to unpack this very cosmic Lisa Frank-esque luggage of Heaven's Gate. 90s reference, feeling nostalgic today. But remember, as you're listening to this episode, the human search for meaning, belonging, and maybe a bit of adventure is likely something that does not require you to leave this galaxy. Heaven's Gate was an American new religious movement / cult / UFO religion, and they were a mix of New Age, Christian, millennialism, and UFOlogy. Their essential belief was that followers could transform themselves into immortal, extraterrestrial beings once they gave up their human nature and took the necessary steps to ascension to what they called the next level. Sadly, the organization came to an end when all members, including their leader, committed mass suicide in March of 1997. Heaven's Gate was founded by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles in 1974, and their story began with a chance meeting that would spiral into, I think, history's most bizarre cult. Marshall Herff Applewhite Jr. was born on May 17, 1931 in Spur, Texas, to parents Louise Winfield and Marshall Herff Applewhite Sr., who was a Presbyterian minister. Marshall had 3 siblings, and his entire family was deeply religious. But this rang especially true for Marshall, who took his devotion to God very seriously. Marshall earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy in 1952 from Austin College, and he subsequently enrolled at Union Presbyterian Seminary to study theology. Obviously, Marshall's goal was to become a minister. But while he was in seminary school, he met and fell in love with Ann Pierce, and the two were married. Marshall and Ann had 2 children together. Not long into Marshall's studies, Marshall made the decision to leave seminary school because he decided that he wanted to pursue a career in music. Can't say I blame him there. He eventually became the director of music for a Presbyterian church in North Carolina. Marshall's life took a very unexpected turn in 1954 when he was drafted into the United States Army, which he was able to finish by 1956. So, 2-year stint, not that bad. He then attended the University of Colorado, where he graduated with a master's degree in music. Following the completion of his advanced degree, Marshall decided he was going to move to New York. And It was there where he tried to make a name for himself as a professional singer, but he was sadly unsuccessful, probably because he had no talent. I'm only saying that because this guy is responsible for the mass suicide of a lot of people, so please cut me some slack for that comment. You don't see Michael Bublé trying to recruit a bunch of people to do that, so let's get real. This guy sucks. Although now that I think about it, I don't know if any of you are Jared Leto fans. He's an actor, but also if you're emo like me, he is the front man for 30 Seconds to Mars, and that dude totally has this weird cult commune going on. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, just look up his Instagram. It's real weird. Real weird. So maybe there is a dichotomy between being a musician and being a cult leader. All right, let's get back on track. So he was unsuccessful in New York. So then Marshall decided that he was going to teach at the University of Alabama. But sadly, not long into his career there, he lost his job because of a sexual relationship that he had developed with a male student. This was obviously frowned upon in his religion. And once his wife Anne found out, she left him. And unfortunately, to add insult to injury, when he told his parents that he thought that he was gay, his father disowned him. And that's just fucked up. One thing that Marshall was exceedingly just fantastic at was picking up the pieces and moving forward, which is exactly what he did after this huge ordeal in his life. He moved back to Texas, this time to Houston, and he served as chair of the University of St. Thomas's music department, and he also served as the choral director for a local church. While he lived in Houston, he decided to live openly gay, which is amazing for him, but he did also pursue a relationship with a woman during his time there, and the woman eventually left Marshall due to pressure from her family. Shortly after the demise of this relationship, Marshall's mental health declined and he resigned from his role at the University of St. Thomas in 1970. In 1971, Marshall moved to New Mexico, where he briefly ran a deli, but he gave up on this just about a year later and then moved back again to Texas. Sadly, Marshall's father passed away shortly after he moved back to Texas, and unsurprisingly, this caused his mental health to sink even further down. However, things took a turn for what I think Marshall would probably look back on and say the better, but me, as somebody that's looking at this from an outside lens, tethered to reality, I'm going to say probably for the worst, but in 1972, Marshall met a woman named Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a deep, deep interest in biblical prophecy and religion, but not in a normal way. Marshall and Bonnie had an immediate connection, which was really toxic, and they immediately developed a deep bond and a deep friendship. At this point, Marshall had begun to dip his toes into alternatives to traditional Christianity, including the field of astrology. But Bonnie and Marshall were not mentally well, right? So the two met, and this was a recipe for disaster because they just fed off of each other, and any asinine idea that the two had, the other person was not like, hey, I see where you're coming from, but maybe we should just simmer down. No, instead, they just fed off of each other. And it was just this insane symbiotic relationship of UFOs, astrology, monks from the 17th century, and just a ton of other crazy shit. Basically, just anything that would be your worst nightmare that entailed Joe Rogan, like DMT, UFOs, weird shit, like that is what's happening here. That's what's going on here. What happened is that Bonnie kind of took control of their meeting, and she had told Marshall that she was well aware. She knows everything. She's well aware that they were going to meet prior to them meeting because she was informed of this by the extraterrestrials. Unfortunately, it doesn't specify whether this is the tall grays, the little green men, or any other kind of extraterrestrial. It's vague, so one of the extraterrestrials informed her of this meeting, and she further told Marshall that he had a divine assignment that she was going to relay to him, and thus the cult was born. that long after Marshall and Bonnie had met, and she told him that she had foreseen this based on the message that was given to her by the extraterrestrials, Marshall moved into Bonnie's humble abode. But their relationship was not sexual. At this point in time, Bonnie was married with 4 kids, but not soon after this, their relationship escalated. Bonnie's husband filed for divorce and he gained custody of all 4 of their children. Actually, I lied. 3 of their children. One of them was an adult at that point. And after this, Marshall decided that he was going to cut off contact with his family as well. Bonnie and Marshall opened up a bookstore that they named the Christian Arts Center, and they also started a business named The Known Place, where they taught classes on mysticism and religion. However, they closed both businesses very quickly after they started them. So the Wonder Twins decided to shift their focus, and in 1973, the dynamic duo instead decided that they were going to travel across the country in an effort to spread their unhinged message, whatever that may be. I don't even think that they had a message at this point. They were just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what would stick. But while this was going on, Marshall became deeply invested into science fiction, which is going to guide everything from here on out. And by 1974, the Wonder Twins turned their delusions into the outline of a religion that involved science fiction. Makes sense. Sign me the fuck up. Listen, I love science fiction, but I want nothing to do with aliens. Whatever movie Lilu from The Fifth Element was in, that alien movie where she's in Alaska, in Nome, Alaska, and there's those aliens, fuck all that. I want nothing to do with that. Keep the extraterrestrials away from me. Not interested. Sorry. I'm going to slam the door in these bitches' faces like I do with Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're listening, I'm so sorry. I love you. So they solidified their foundation whilst Marshall was getting very deep into science fiction, and they decided that their beliefs stemmed from the fact that they were the 2 witnesses described in the book of Revelation. Listen, I don't know what the fuck this was, so I had to go and do some research. So if you are not religious, I'm going to explain it. And if I fuck this up, there's links in the show notes. So I'm sorry. I did my research. But the quote from Revelations reads, and there's different versions, but it's almost the same. Quote, "And I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." I wish I could explain the significance of that passage from the book of Revelation and why they are the 2 witnesses, but I got to be honest with you, I don't know. So if you are out there listening and you are religious and you know the book of Revelation and you think you might have some insight, please let me know. My best guess, and this is also a very jaded guess, is that Marshall knew the Bible inside and out based on his upbringing and his education thereafter, and he just picked something that sounded good, and thus that's the passage they picked from the book of Revelation. So Bonnie and Marshall believed, or they led people on to believe, that they thought that they were the 2 witnesses from the book of Revelation. Obviously, because it makes complete sense, they began to refer to themselves as the UFO 2 or the 2 because, yeah, why wouldn't they? So the UFO 2 believed that they would be killed somehow. They didn't know how, when, where, what, who, why, all of the above. But once that happened, their lives would be restored whilst on a spaceship. And they named this whole ordeal the demonstration. And this was the foundation of Heaven's Gate at its very beginnings. I want to dive into Bonnie's history to give you a better feel for the second half of this cult. Bonnie Trousdale was born on August 29th of 1927 in Houston, Texas, into a devout Baptist family. Bonnie became a nurse, and she married businessman Joseph Nettles in December of 1949. Their marriage was stable by all accounts, until 1972, which is around the time that Bonnie had met Marshall. But right before that, Bonnie did start getting into some weird shit, right? Some weird fucking shit. And while we might not consider all of this weird today, this is the 70s. So all of this was probably so scary to anybody that uncovered it, right? So Bonnie decided to start going to multiple fortune tellers, and according to her, they all told her that she was going to meet a mysterious, tall man who was pale, with light hair. And to be honest, that described Marshall to a T. She then began to, on her own, do her own seances, which that is ballsy. So she conducted multiple seances on her own because she wanted to contact dead spirits. And then she began to believe that I said 17th century earlier, and I meant to say 19th century, but she began to believe that a 19th century monk named Brother Francis frequently spoke with her and told her what to do all of the time. I'm the kind of person where if somebody tells me what to do, I feel this insane urge to do the complete polar opposite. So if I did a seance and some dead monk tried to tell me, anybody dead tried to tell me what to do, I would immediately feel an impulsive urge to do the opposite. And I'm like, what would happen to me? Would I get possessed? Would I die? I'm feeling for Bonnie right now because this is intense. So by 1975, Marshall and Bonnie, who were at this point going by Bo and Peep, nope, I'm not making a joke. That's actually what they called themselves. At this time, they had about 70, maybe a few over that followers. Bo and Peep were apt nicknames because they viewed themselves as shepherds and their followers as sheep. So, little Bo Peep. Yeah, it's great. You couldn't make this shit up if you tried, honestly. The jokes write themselves. So early followers were required to sever ties to friends and family and let go of all earthly possessions. Drugs, alcohol, and facial hair, as well as sexuality, were also things that members had to give up prior to becoming sheep. And by 1976, Bo and Peep decided that they were going to start going by Doe and T. Now, here's my thought process behind this. I tried to Google it. I couldn't find anything on it, but Marshall had a very strong foundation in music. And if any of you love music as much as I do, you've probably seen The Sound of Music, which came out in 1965, so the date checks. And there's a song called Do, Re, Mi. Do, a deer, a female deer. Re, a drop of golden sun. Anyway, Do and T are notes in that song. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, I think that's probably where Marshall got those names from. But that's just my best guess. But I'm going to be honest with you, it's the best guess that's out there. Write that down. You heard it here first. Anyway, these were the names that Marshall and Bonnie would go by until their deaths. Marshall insisted the names were meaningless again, but for those of us that are music nerds, we know that shit isn't true. Just fucking say it, Marshall. Just say it. Just say you're a nerd for the sound of music like we all are. Like, it's fine. We all know that the hills are alive with the sound of music, so it's whatever. But anyway. In 1976, the cult stopped recruiting and went dark because they could not handle the judgments from people that were sane, lucid, and tethered to reality. Turns out, most people at that time didn't believe that they were living in rented skin suits waiting to board a UFO to eternity. Between 1976 to 1979, the cult group camped between Texas and the Rocky Mountains. As time passed, Marshall and Bonnie, or Doe and T, they began to demand a stricter obedience from their followers, but it was still pretty flexible at this point. Marshall decided to start telling his students that they needed to act as children or pets, and he insisted that they started to get comfortable with accepting total submissiveness. The only responsibility of the student should be to obey Bonnie and Marshall as their leaders. Even though he was kind of tightening the reins, Marshall was still looked at as the laid-back leader, which tracks, honestly, because he doesn't have a 19th century monk calling the shots. So, yeah, it makes sense that he's more laid back. But he did also become somewhat of a fatherly figure to many, which I actually like. So he was known as that more calm presence in the cult. Between 1975 to 1976, the cult had less than 200 followers. And they had way more prior to this, but the massive drop was due to this crackdown on banning sex and drugs. And Doe and T shifted their movement towards one that is more akin to a classroom-like environment. So Doe and T were the teacher and the members were students. And the goal of this layout was to arrange a dynamic that facilitated students asking questions about the group's ideologies and the next level. So I'm going to dive into the process of becoming a student and joining and what it entails. And this is actually all from their book, which I have listed in the show notes. So just to give a background on this organization before I get into their teachings and requirements, I'm going to do my best to explain the how and the why. And this is not going to be great because it's just slap a question mark on this bitch because a lot of it is unclear. But from what I gathered, some of the members, not all of them, some of them, this actually is specific to Bonnie and Marshall at the very least, and perhaps others. They heard the voices of their shepherds. And that was like being awoken abruptly from a deep sleep. And this occurred in 1975 to 1976. Others, people that joined the organization later, which I will get into in part 2, that could have happened as late as 1994. Something that I thought was interesting about this is that we have birth dates for Marshall and Bonnie. Marshall was born in 1931 and Bonnie was born in 1927, but I guess they were just living in a cryogenic state mentally. You know what? I don't even know. I'm not even going to try to guess. Even though they were born 40 plus years prior, this was then, at the very least, those two were awoken abruptly from their deep sleep. And while us normal people may look at the group's ultimate choice of suicide as shitty, that is because we don't have the chip deposited in the hardware of our soul by the next level, which is what they're trying to achieve, the next level, to compute this logic. And they explain it like a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. You have to completely separate from the caterpillar, which I am positing is the physical world, but then you get the ultimate gift of everlasting life in a new world, which is the butterfly, because you are taken out of the cycle of death. Now, according to this book, the origins of Heaven's Gate occur, it's really broad, right? Because why wouldn't it be? Sometime between the 1920s and the 1950s, there was a main dude named the Admiral, and this dude had a crew. The main guy's name was the captain, and they picked up and prepped human bodies that these aliens or whatever the fuck they are would wear during their missions, because these people are inhabiting skin suits during their missions on Earth. Just try to keep up, okay? Like, this makes complete sense. If you're lost, like, this makes total sense, okay? So they came into the bodies in the 1970s. The Admiral and the Captain were first, and then they began to get their flock together in 1975 to help them in the process of entering and taking charge of those people's assigned human bodies. Here's the one thing where I'm caught up on, right? Okay, maybe one of you can help me out. I don't know. This is a couple of questions. Were these bodies already occupied? So were one of these bodies that they selected already inhabited by a person with, like, oxygen in their lungs and thoughts in their brain? Uh, because if so, what the fuck happened to these people? And if not, were these just like random hollow people, like just like empty corpses, just like kept in like a freezer? I mean, I have so many questions about that part, but everything else makes complete sense, to be quite frank. So if you have any hypotheses, please let me know. So anyway, those two then took their people to a secluded area where they could be separate from the people that were still tethered to reality for almost 17 years until they completed their awakening, which was in the 1970s. So there was a media statement in 1975 that was judged, rightfully so, and they were labeled as a UFO cult. And this is what caused them to go into seclusion in the 1970s that I mentioned prior. They did come out in 1992, which I'll get into in part 2. But before I go on regarding the classrooms, I wanted to read directly from their website, which is still active, and I put it in the show notes. So if you're curious, there's a link, and it's still active, and it's great. It looks like it was done in Microsoft Paint, nostalgic from the 90s. And yeah, so I'm just going to read how they came about directly from their website because it's amazing. 2,000 years ago, a crew of members of the kingdom of heaven who are responsible for nurturing gardens determined that a percentage of human plants of the present civilization of this garden, Earth, had developed enough that some of these bodies might be ready to be used as containers for soul deposits. Upon instruction, a member of the kingdom of heaven then left behind his body in that next level, parentheses, similar to putting it in a closet like a suit of clothes that doesn't need to be worn for a while, end parentheses. I just love that explanation. Thank you so much. That painted a profound picture. I'll keep going. Came to Earth and moved into or incarnated into an adult human body or, quote, vehicle that had been, quote, prepped for this particular task. This body was chosen, was called Jesus. That sentence didn't make sense, but I digress. I'll continue. The member of the kingdom of heaven who was instructed to incarnate into that body did so at his, quote, father's or older member's instruction. He, quote, moved into or took over that body when it was 29 or 30 years old, at that time referred to as its baptism by John the Baptist. The incarnating event was depicted as the Holy Spirit descended upon him in a bodily form like a dove. I guess we're quoting Luke 3:22. The body named Jesus was tagged in its formative period to be a receptacle of the next level representative. Those are the motherfuckers in space that are supposed to take you into the UFO and take you and beyond. So that's those motherfuckers. And even just that tagging gave that vehicle some unique awareness of its coming purpose. The sole task that was given to this member from the kingdom of heaven was to offer the way leading to membership into the kingdom of heaven to those who recognized him for who he was and chose to follow him. The kingdom of heaven is at hand meant since I am here and I am from that kingdom. If you leave everything of this world and follow me, I can take you into my Father's kingdom. Only those individuals who had received a deposit containing a soul's beginning had the capacity to believe or recognize the kingdom of heaven's representative. They could get to his Father only through total reliance upon him. He later sent his students out with the, quote, good news of the kingdom of heaven is at hand, end quote. And his followers could then help gather the flock so that the shepherd might teach others what was required of them to enter his Father's house, his Father's kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, in the literal and physical heavens, certainly not among humans on earth. I guess that's where UFOs come in. Leaving behind this world included, this is just, I love it. This is what you're going to leave behind. Okay. Family, sensuality, selfish desires. So wanting to poop in peace, probably. Your human mind and even your human body, if it be required of you. all mammalian ways, thinking and behavior. Since he had been through this metamorphic transition himself from human to level above human under the guidance of his Father, he was qualified to take others through that same discipline and transition. Remember, the one who incarnated in Jesus was sent for one purpose, only to say, quote, if you want to go to heaven, I can take you through that gate. It requires everything of you, end quote. If you're lost, well, that fucking sucks because that made complete sense to me. To be honest, like if it didn't make sense to you, then I don't know what to tell you. No, but really, I have no idea what any of that meant. But they do go on to say this. Our mission is exactly the same. I don't know what that mission is, but okay. I am in the same position to today's society as was the one that was in Jesus then. So he's comparing himself to Jesus, which is not a red flag. My being here now is actually a continuation of that last task, as was promised to those who were students 2,000 years ago. They are here again, continuing in their own overcoming while offering the same transition to others. Our only purpose is to offer the discipline and grafting required of the transition into membership in my Father's house. My father, my older member, came with me this time for the first half of this task to assist in the task because of its present difficulty. I don't know. Then this guy goes on saying, looking to us and desiring to be a part of my Father's kingdom. I think what he's saying is that this kingdom in the Bible is their next level and they're supposed to be interchangeable, can offer to those with deposits that chance to connect with the level above human. So aliens, duh, and begin that transition. Your separation from the world and reliance upon the kingdom of heaven or aliens, I guess, through its representatives can open you to the opportunity to become a new creature or alien, one of the next evolutionary level, rightfully belonging to the kingdom of heaven. Jesus fucking Christ. I don't know. But yeah, that's what it says. Circling back to the process of joining/becoming a student of Heaven's Gate goes back to the next level's desire to help nourish our souls. If the next level believes that an individual has the capacity to understand, then the next level will put you in contact with the information presented in apparently only ads from Heaven's Gate. So if you just happen to not see any of those ads, then I guess you're fucked and the next level just thinks you're shit. But if you do see it, you come across it, it resonates with you, and you end up reaching out, the next level will then closely observe how you choose to respond to said ad or poster, whatever you see and respond to. Individuals are then invited to submit an application to a classroom. And according to Heaven's Gate, to be considered a candidate is the highest honor. And the next level, or the true kingdom of God, is extremely selective. So if you have been chosen, then girl, you the shit. And when you're the shit, you're now a student. But that begins a trial period. But the caveat to that is, if during the trial period you display any skepticism, hesitancy to sever ties with any addictions, these would all be considered no-nos in addition to everything that I said before. Remember, they were trying to create a genderless organization where everybody was celibate. They renounced all of their worldly possessions. They severed all of their ties. But additionally, they have a list, which I will post on social media, of major and other offenses, which I am going to list right now. Number 1 in the major offenses is deceit. That consists of doing an act, quote, on the sly, or lying to my teachers or any of my classmates, or keeping an offense to myself or not exposing it the same day. The second part of that is sensuality, which they define as, I just get good luck getting any adult to actually give this up for life, but permitting arousal in thought or in action, not nipping it in the bud. And 3 is breaking any instruction or procedure knowingly. Wow. I'm sure that everybody adhered to that, but it gets crazier because there are other offenses, and let's get ready because there's 31 of them. Yay. Okay, so let's get into the truly unhinged shit, which are their other offenses, and there's 31. Number 1, taking any action without using my check partner, which I will elaborate on the whole partner thing in a bit. Number 2, trusting my own judgment or using my own mind. If that isn't a box of red flags, then I don't know what is. Number 3, twisting procedures for my own benefit. 4, responding defensively to my classmates or teachers. 5, criticizing or finding fault with my classmates or teachers. 6, allowing blatant or lingering negativity, accepting the position of I can't. 7, permitting physical or verbal abuse, outbursts, harsh words, sarcasm, swearing, anger, hurtful teasing, loss of temper towards classmates. 8, allowing jealousy towards any classmates or comparing myself to others. 9, staying in my own head, having private thoughts, not staying open with my partner, separateness. 10, putting myself first, wanting my own way, rebelliousness, selfishness. 11, entertaining inappropriate fears and worries. Example, am I going to be asked to leave the class? Will our rest or consuming be adequate for my needs? 12, inappropriately offering suggestions, second guessing or jumping ahead of my teachers. 13, exaggerating vehicular symptoms. I don't know what the fuck that means. 14, allowing anxiety, stress, tension, hyperness to affect my performance. ADHD checking out. I would be out here. 15, picking or choosing certain tasks. That's weird. That's like what? 16, it gets weirder, having likes or dislikes. Okay. 17, permitting laziness or slothfulness. 18, procrastinating, having misplaced priorities or poor timing. 19, permitting lack of control over emotions to the point that it interferes with my work or rest or is a distraction to others. I had that on like every report card ever, distraction to others. 20, participating in extremes in sensitivity, either blatantly insensitive or overly sensitive to the point of hurt feelings, either hurting my feelings or the feelings of others. 21, desiring attention or approval, wanting to be seen as good. Don't we all? 22, using inadequate restraint, responding or acting too quickly, voice volume, noise level with feet, doors, or other objects. That's really weird. Again, this isn't like a preschool classroom. This is like fully fucking grown adults. 23, engaging in familiarity, casualness, gossip, lack of restraint with others. 24, being too aggressive or pushy. I'd be out there too. 25, exercising poor control of thoughts running through my head, being easily distracted. Again, strike me out. 26, lacking in effort and commitment. 27, permitting impatience or intolerance. 28, being vain about my appearance, vibrating femininity or masculinity in any way. Remember, they wanted an androgynous, gender-neutral organization. 29, having inappropriate curiosity. Is curiosity ever inappropriate? Like, Curious George would have a real problem with this. 30, identifying with influences using the I or me pronoun in application to an offense instead of recognizing that it was an influence using me. And lastly, because wow, this list was way too short, 31, over-examination, finding a negative where there isn't one. So circling back to recruitment, if you have been selected by the next level, you are the shit. But to be considered a candidate is an honor, and you must adhere to these really strict rules that I just went through. And what they feel is that if somebody enters as a student, then that student must fully commit. But in addition to that, they must not desire any kind of leadership or recognition. So the individual that is pursuing becoming a student should only want the next level, which is, I'm going to be blunt, it's suicide. And know that whatever instructions they receive is exactly what they need to adhere to. Now, the book that the religious organization laid out organizes in subheadings the different processes that one must go through to become a student. And the first is possessions. So according to the cult, part of the process of separating from the world, which they refer to as the human kingdom, means that you must truly relinquish yourself. And they mean that that includes letting go of all of your earthbound possessions. Heaven's Gate believes that holding on to any worldly possession interferes with the student's ability of being able to truly let go of the things that bind them to the human kingdom. Next on the list is relationships. Prior to entering the classroom, the student must have severed all ties with anyone and any relationship that they had, even if there is a relative that ends up saying, hey, I think I might be interested in joining this organization. You cannot maintain contact, and you cannot help that relative in the process. That individual that desires to become a student must sever the tie on their own, and if the relative chooses to join, they must do so on their own. But here's the caveat to that. You might think, oh, well, if they both join, it'll be great. No. If they do both join, they can only refer to themselves as task partners and crew members, as they would with anybody else in the organization. So there's no familial relation that is allowed to exist in that organization. You cannot have a familial relationship in this cult, religious organization. Also, Heaven's Gate does not allow anyone to join as a minor. And again, like I mentioned before, every class member must maintain celibacy. And this is to ensure that there are no children that are born within the cult, the religious organization. Regarding addictions, Heaven's Gate considers pretty much anything that people indulge in addition to what we consider to be a potential addiction to be an addiction. So alcohol, smoking, gambling, sex, specific habits that they deem unnecessary, foods you eat, specific opinions you may have, and beliefs. These are all addictions that they deem to be shitty, and they all have to be given up prior to entering as a student. Listen, I know you're listening to this and you are ripping your headphones out. You're tossing your phone across the room and you're just like, Ashley, give me the fucking sign up sheet. I hear you. Let me just get to the trial period. Listen, cults come with a buyer's guarantee. Most states it's 3 days. It's standard operating procedure for cults as well. So prior to becoming a member, all relationships must be severed as well as all possessions. And an individual must recognize that they are part of the cult family, want to adopt their ways, and nothing threatens their total commitment. At any point in time during this process, while you're becoming a student, either party, the tall gray aliens or the individual student, you can opt out. It's fine. It's like a lemon law. So in the 1970s, after they had done recruiting and went out to the media and were deemed a UFO cult, I can't fathom for the life of me why, they decided to cut off contact with the media as well as anybody that was inquiring to join. And instead, they chose to focus on themselves. At this point, one of the main focuses of the group, the cult, was to exist without gender. And they achieved this by forcing celibacy. What bothers me about this is, and hear me out, one of the ways that they enforced this was through surgical castration. And this was discovered after the group's mass suicide. And I'm just, I don't know that I jive with that. Additionally, members were forced to wear androgynous clothing, and they all had similar haircuts, which were like weird, awkward bowl cut variations. But by the late 1970s, the cult came upon a large sum of money, and how is unclear. It is possible that it was inheritance from a member, or possibly a donation, or maybe income from one of the members. But the cult then used this sum of money to rent houses in Denver and Dallas, Texas. T and Do, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, had about 40 followers at this point. Unsurprisingly, they lost many. And this was far less than the few hundred that they had amassed in the earlier 1970s. And they split this following between 3 houses in those areas, with the leaders having their own private homes. Obviously, alien leaders need their privacy, and the cult still remained private at this point after the backlash from the media that I think that they thought was really just going to go their way. I think they thought that people would resonate and they'd be like, yeah, this UFO cult is what's up. And it backfired and they're like, all right, let's just jump into seclusion. But I digress. At this point, most members still held jobs, for the most part, typically working with computers or mechanics or things that were beneficial to the cult. In 1982, Bonnie and Marshall, they began to bend the rules. They allowed their followers to call their families on very specific occasions. They further bent the rules the following year in 1983, allowing relatives to visit, but only on Mother's Day. Obviously, these visits were kept short, and followers were instructed before these visits that they needed to tell their relatives that they were studying computer science at a monastery. In the 1970s, I'd be like, wow, yeah, that sounds right. Unbeknownst to their followers, this was only done to give their families a false sense of security and to keep them satisfied and to shut them the fuck up. Bonnie was diagnosed with cancer several years prior to 1983. However, for unknown reasons, she chose to put that issue on the back burner until 1983. As a result of this, that year she had to have her eye surgically removed due to complications from untreated cancer. This ended up resulting in Bonnie's death just 2 years later in 1985. Bonnie was just 57 years old. Bonnie's death in 85 marked a pivotal shift in the group's beliefs, emphasizing the necessity to leave their human vehicles behind in order to ascend. This belief crystallized with the appearance of the Hale-Bopp comet in 1995, which Marshall proclaimed as the harbinger of their journey to the next level. But in an effort to maintain the ideologies of the cult at the time, which prior to Bonnie's death was that individuals would reach the next level alive on a UFO, Bonnie's unexpected and early death from cancer shook the cult's ideologies because, while they believed that's how their ascension would occur, this changed the plot twist, and they then had to believe that the body was merely a vehicle and that their consciousness would transfer to the next level after death. Obviously, because Bonnie's death didn't go down as they believed in a UFO, Marshall had to do crisis control, so he spun the narrative. He spun it as Bonnie's death was actually successful even without the UFO. Marshall explained that the group wouldn't physically ascend from the Earth, resulting in a reincarnation after death, but instead, plot twist, the group inhabited bodies, and these bodies would be left behind. Bonnie's spirit, Marshall logically explained, traveled to a spaceship and received a new body. Nobody was present for this process, but I'm telling you, it happened. And this was the fate that they all awaited. Magical. Splendiferous. But Bonnie's death threw Marshall into a very deeply intensive, depressive state, one that would change the trajectory of the cult forever. Marshall claimed that Bonnie was still in contact with him somehow, and he eventually organized a symbolic ceremony in which he married each and every one of his followers to himself. He told his followers that he was left behind by Bonnie because he still had much to learn, which is a big red flag if you ask me. Marshall was in a downward spiral. Without Bonnie, he lacked a clear path, he lacked guidance, and he was just lost at sea like a sad puppy. So Marshall then decided that he would tell his followers that the only way to salvation was via a close relationship with him, and that he should be viewed as Christ. This is the route that every cult member takes, by the way. if you've been listening to my episodes. Every cult I've covered, they always compare themselves to Christ. It's like cult 101. It's inevitable. So obviously this is getting to his head and he's like, yeah, I'm basically Christ. So I say this loosely because they didn't really have much. But while the group previously had a slight option of individual choice, this was totally rescinded after Bonnie's passing. Marshall maintained some of the original scientific beliefs of the group's foundation as the group headed towards the 1980s, but they then shifted towards a more strict religious focus, which emphasized submissiveness to authority. After Bonnie's death, Marshall altered his view of ascension. Previously, they taught that the group would physically ascend from the earth and that death caused reincarnation, but her death, which left behind an unchanged corporeal body, forced him to say that, I'm not going to say I'm wrong, but the ascension could be spiritual. He then concluded that Bonnie's spirit had traveled to a spaceship and received a new body, and that all of the followers would do the same. Marshall drew from the biblical heaven, which he believed was actually a planet where there were these beings that were highly evolved and they lived, and the physical bodies were required to ascend to that level. He believed that once they reached the next level, they would facilitate evolution on every other planet out there. And he emphasized that Jesus, who he thought was an alien, an extraterrestrial, came to Earth. He was killed in the same fashion that he was in the Bible. And his body did arise from the dead, as was in the Bible. But after that, he was transported onto a spaceship. Makes complete sense. And according to Marshall's doctrine, Jesus was the gateway to heaven, but humans had to reach the next level every 2 millennia. And the early 1990s would provide the first opportunity for humans to reach the next level or the kingdom of heaven since the time of Jesus. And Marshall's beliefs were loosely based on the Christian Bible, but they were interpreted through a weird sci-fi lens that involved aliens and weird contact with humanity. This is a really fancy way of me saying that after Bonnie T's death, life inside Heaven's Gate became even farther removed from conventional reality, meticulously designed to prepare their members for ascension beyond their human containers. And at the heart of this preparation was an all-encompassing drive to shed every aspect of humanity, a process that touched upon every facet of daily life within this cult. Members were forced to relinquish all of their personal possessions, finances, their sexual identities. They were forced to adhere to a doctrine that insisted on androgynous presentation and the suppression of all sexual desires. And this extreme commitment to celibacy, as I mentioned earlier, went as far as voluntary castration for a majority of the members, which included Marshall, the leader himself. And this was done as a means to completely eradicate any human urges and attachments. The day-to-day life was marked by a communal living arrangement that was anything but ordinary. Members dressed identically, and they adhered to a strict uniformity that extended beyond clothes to include their haircuts, their behaviors, their mannerisms, their gestures. Every single aspect of their lives were regulated, from the preparation of their meals to the restriction of if, when, and how they could leave the house, with only a select few members granted the permission to even be able to venture outside, which ensured that the cult maintained a low profile from any prying eyes from the outside world. Marshall's control over the group was absolute after Bonnie's death. His manipulation tactics honed to retain members and ensure their absolute and unwavering devotion. The control extended to enforcing a lifestyle completely devoid of any individualism, where even members' thoughts were monitored to make sure that they aligned with the group's teaching. The use of tone, a constant auditory focus, was kept to maintain that members kept their minds clear of normal human thoughts, and they facilitated this strict adherence to a mental discipline. But in spite of the strict regulations and the looming promise of a mass departure, which members didn't really know what it entailed at this point, the atmosphere among members was not one that felt like it was oppressive or sad. There's a lot of footage and accounts that I'm going to get into in part 2 from within the cult that depicts a group of individuals who seem outwardly cheerful and really committed to their path and smiling even in the face of their eventual doom of the mass departure. The foundation of Heaven's Gates beliefs rested on the promise of ascension to a higher plane of existence, referred to as the acronym TELA, the evolutionary level above human. This belief system drew in those disillusioned with society, and they offered them a blend of asceticism, Christianity, science fiction, and mysticism, and it promised answers to the spiritual questions of the era at its time. The cult's message, appealing to a modern update of Christian heritage with a technical, weird sci-fi twist, attracted, again, like I mentioned before, up to 200 members at its peak. But after Bonnie's death, Marshall just couldn't keep up. He did the best that he could to keep the organization going. And many scholars suspect that students began to feel restless and stagnant within the organization. But Marshall serendipitously learned of the Hale-Bopp comet that was supposed to be passing Earth in 1995, closer than it ever has before. And he decided to state that this was the link between Tela, the evolutionary level above human, and the world that they were inhabiting. This discovery would eventually lead to the group's mass suicide, which I am going to leave for part 2. I know, I suck. But if you did like what you heard today, even though I left you on a very intense cliffhanger, please subscribe, leave me a review. You can find me on all social media at fthatpod, except for Instagram, which is fthat_pod. The website is fthatpod.com. And if you cannot get enough of me, which I would totally get because listen to me. If you're looking for all of my archived content, bonus episodes, extra interactions with me, live streams, check me out on Patreon at fthatpod. Love you. Bye.